Good afternoon, everyone. Stacey Alcorn here, and we are back for an afternoon program on the psychology of persuasion. This program is about 45 minutes long, and it focuses, I'm going to give you all the information on the books that all of this is based on, but at the end of the day, we're going to spend most of the time talking about persuasion, how to persuade people in order to get what you want. Today is about how do you get what you want in life and business. We're then going to move into persuasion. So persuasion is getting people to make decisions the way you want them to make decisions. I always like to start this program by talking about the importance of using this. I mean, once you know the psychology of how the human mind works, there's a lot of things you can do with it. So make sure that you are doing good in the world by the rules that we talk about today. And once we talk about persuasion, we're going to talk about persuasion. So the first part is about like different things you can do to help influence people and guide people to make a particular decision the way you want them to make the decision. And then the next half of the program today is then talking about persuasion, like getting people to a point where they are now ready to make a decision. So it's kind of like a two-step process. So I'm just bringing up my Facebook so that if anybody has questions today, you can feel free to ask them either on Zoom. We have people that are watching this on Zoom, or you can do it right within the Facebook group. So I'm going to be watching it both ways. So with that, I'm going to start digging into our content for today. So what is persuasion? It's causing someone to do something through reasoning or argument. Today, we're going to talk about what you can do to use social influence to get people to move in the direction that you want them to move, which, by the way, is a good thing to know when we're working with buyers and sellers. I mean, we're in the business of helping people make decisions. That's what we do for a living. So we're going to talk about the 6 principles of social influence, 6 simple ways to cause people to buy or sell with you. So that's an important distinction, just to realize that what you say and do has an impact on the person across from you, their decision-making ability. So we cause people to make decisions. And oftentimes, if we don't realize that we cause people to make decisions, then we may actually do the opposite. We also cause people not to make decisions. So the first rule that I like to talk about, because this is a simple one that we all kind of get, is the rule of reciprocation. So if you basically, let's talk about the rule. People say yes to people they owe. Those who have given us benefit, anybody who's given us benefit are then entitled to a benefit in return. By the way, this is drilled into us as children. So we learn by the time we're like 5 years old that if somebody does something for you, you're supposed to return the favor. So this is so ingrained in us as human beings that when we do something for somebody, and by the way, this is like the whole idea. We did an earlier program today on the power of Popeyes. If you keep showing up and giving people stuff, then more likely they're going to want to return the favor. And the way they return the favor in our business is they refer us customers, or they give us their own business. So in general, we live by cultural norms. In one study, shoppers at a candy store became 42% more likely to make a purchase if they received a free piece of chocolate before entering. So think about that in your own business. Like this candy store. So just thinking about like this candy store has the ability to cause somebody to make a candy buying decision. And the way they cause that is they know that if they give somebody a free piece of candy, because of the power of reciprocation, they know that that person now feels like this internal obligation. By the way, that person doesn't even realize that they have that internal built-in obligation that they learned since they were 5 years old. It's just ingrained in them. They don't even think about it. But that a candy store can increase the likelihood of getting somebody to make a buying decision simply by giving a free piece of candy away. We see it at Costco. So if you go to like some of these big Costco's, things like they give away free stuff. So the reason they have these vendors there giving away free samples is because Costco knows the power of reciprocity. If we give you something for free, that increases the likelihood that you're going to end up buying from us. You will also see it in charitable campaigns. Have you ever noticed every once in a while you get a piece of mail and it actually has money in it? That's because they know if they give you $1 or a coin under the power of reciprocity, they are catering to that built-in ingrained little belief you have in you that if somebody gives you something, that you have to give something in return. So think about reciprocity in your own business. So there's lots of ways that this can play out in your business as a real estate agent. Number one, giving gifts to people. So just like the candy store example, where the candy store can increase your likelihood of making that buying decision by giving you a piece of candy. We can do that in our own business. So for example, giving away a free book, for example, to somebody increases, because of reciprocity, their likelihood that they're going to work with you. Maybe it's showing up after you do a listing appointment, showing up the next day with a little plant, a potted plant, to say, hey, thank you for letting me sit with you. I can't wait to do business together. That speaks to the reciprocity that is built into that person. As many of you know, I'm a huge fan of blogging and interviewing and going out and exposing businesses. And I tell real estate agents, one of the fastest ways to become the #1 agent in your market is to go out and interview business owners in your market and feature them on your blog. The reason this works, by the way, is the power of reciprocity. Many of you guys know I've spent 10 years going out and interviewing people. And I always say I have a backstage pass to life because I went out and exposed hundreds, 400, 500 business leaders, CEOs. I exposed their greatness to the world through blogging and writing about them, that because of reciprocity, we can, those people want to return a favor. Like that's ingrained in us as human beings. So maybe it's giving a plant, maybe it's stopping by a for sale by owners property and giving them a little for sale by owner survival kit that just says, hey, I put together some great information to help you get your house sold. It's a very different conversation than calling and saying, I want to be your real estate agent. It's giving a gift, because that gift speaks to reciprocity. Many of you guys know that I have a husband that has built his real estate business, legitimately has built a massive real estate sales business on sending cards and gifts to people. So if you're not the type of person that likes to sit and make cold calls for 3 hours a day to strangers, there's other ways to build a business. One of those ways is, imagine that you spend the first hour of every single morning sending out a card. So seeing a prompting on Facebook that a customer of yours from 5 years ago, that their kid just graduated from college, and sending out a little personal note to that person with a box of brownies or something and saying, hey, congrats. I mean, that is the power of reciprocity. So Jay has built a significant real estate business using this power to influence people. when you are using reciprocity, some of my little pieces I like to remind people, meaningful and unexpected gifts are the most powerful. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So when you do this, like the reason reciprocity works is because basically what you're saying to the person is, I'm giving you something because I care about you. And the person on the receiving end of that realizes that I need to now express to that other person that I care about them as well. Reciprocation is a cultural universal, and it's taught in every society. So it's just super interesting that one of the ways we can influence people to do what we want them to do is this power of reciprocation. So that one is number one. You need to get somebody to do what you want. Think about what you could give them that would make them want to reciprocate. Number two is the theory of liking. We like people who are like us. That's another piece of who we are as humans. So if you want people to like you, if you want them to buy or sell with you, you have to be the one to find your similarities. So think about this when you're at a listing appointment or meeting a buyer for the first time. You want to start digging and figuring out ways that you are common, because that's where you create that bond. The more somebody realizes that they are like you, the more they are going to like you. So we can influence people who like us. So we have to figure out ways to get people to realize that we're kind of the same person. So you do that by asking questions. Look for clues of commonalities on social media or their home. So if you're meeting a buyer for the first time, you might go onto their social media and just see, like, do you have any common friends, or where did they grow up, or are they into concerts and you're into concerts, or do they have a backyard garden and you have a backyard garden? Any way in which you can show that you're like someone will make it so they like you. And when somebody likes you, you can help influence the decisions they make. We see that as well. Anytime, if you've gone through any type of sales training, they tell you like the idea of mirroring, voice inflections when you're sitting in front of somebody. All of that makes a difference because you're just being like them. And there's like these little signals that go off in our head when we see somebody that's gesturing the way we are, that speaks the way we are. Something goes off in our heads that says, hey, this person is like me. By the way, people, if you want somebody to like you, another way to get them to like you is by showing them that you like them. So it sounds like really basic, but this works. Like by paying a compliment, by the way, I mean, this goes to the beginning of what we talked about today, is that it needs to be genuine and real, like no throwing out fake compliments to people. But when you compliment somebody, what the example that I like to talk about, as many of you guys know, I love shoes and I have tons of shoes. Well, if I go out to an event and I'm in a room full of strangers, first of all, I'm going to find the other females in the room that are like, who like shoes. And that's easy to do because I could see what people are wearing for shoes. And then I'll go over and pay a compliment on somebody's shoes. What I know is that because I paid that person a compliment on their shoes, usually I have an instant friend, because people like who are the people who are like us, number one. So we both have something in common. But also when you pay a compliment to somebody, you're basically saying to them, hey, I like you. So think about how you can use that in your business. Just an interesting, this was just like an interesting study that was done. According to one study, a hair salon that told every client, quote, any hairstyle would look good on you, saw average tips rise by 37%. That's the power of a compliment. So just think about how you can use compliments in your business. Number 3, if you want to influence somebody's decisions, one of the ways that you can do that is by providing social proof that other people are making that same decision. That's something that is also ingrained within us as human beings. And this is why Zillow reviews make such a big difference in our businesses. And by the way, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be just Zillow reviews. Testimonials and reviews in general in our business are a must because it's social proof. So it's basically saying, like, to somebody, the reason you should work with me as your realtor is because all these other people have worked with me. People think it's appropriate for them to believe, feel, or do something to the extent that others, especially comparable others, are believing, feeling, or doing the same thing. So think about like your social proof in your business. Where are you showing people that other people believe in you? Restaurants use social proof. So when you go to a restaurant and you see like the customer favorites menu, that's typically a way of a restaurant persuading you to choose a particular item off the menu. Why would they want to do that? Well, potentially there's certain things on the menu that are more profitable to the restaurant than other things. So restaurants use persuasion to get you to choose the items that are more profitable for them. So by listing customer favorites on a menu order, those items will increase on average by 13 to 20%. So think about that. If I'm a restaurateur and I want to persuade you to this menu item, because I know I'm going to make more money on that menu item, all I have to do is put something on my menu that says these are the customer favorites. And now it is wired in us that if this is what everybody's favorite is, then this is probably going to be my favorite too. So I need to order that. Amazon does it, of course. I mean, I'm an avid book buyer, as many of you know, and every time I go on Amazon, if I'm buying one book, there's probably a good chance I'm going to buy 3, because what Amazon does to influence my decision-making is they say, they know that if they flash these and say, hey, the other people that bought the book you're buying also bought these books. Now I'm like, all right, well, if the other people who are like me like those books, then I probably need to have those books too. So the more you study persuasion, and then the next step, which is persuasion, which we're going to talk about in a little while, you start seeing it all around you. You realize, I mean, we are being influenced all day, every day on the media, on Facebook, and conversations we have, in sales conversations. Not only that, we are influencing decisions that other people make. So even if you don't realize you're doing it, you're doing it. And if you don't realize you're doing it, potentially you're influencing people to make the wrong decisions or not to make a decision. So it's important to understand how this works in your business. Your listing presentations, your buyer presentations, your Facebook page, your postcards, none of these things should be complete in your business without showing customer testimonials. Like, you have to embed them. And it's interesting because sometimes agents are like, well, I don't like to brag. I mean, this isn't you bragging, it's somebody else bragging, but you have to put those in because that is going to trigger a buying decision in many of your clients or potential clients. The fourth way to persuade people. People are easily persuaded. It is much easier to make people or help people, guide them towards a decision if they see you as an authority. People believe authorities. So this is really interesting because there's a few different ways that you can make this work. Number one, you can become the authority, and we'll talk about how you can do that. The other thing you can do is if somebody of authority says you're the real estate agent who somebody should be using, then that person is more likely to move in the direction of the decision you want them to make. So when a legit expert on a topic speaks, people are usually persuaded. Sometimes information becomes persuasive only because an authority is its source. I mean, this is why we see famous people are used in television commercials, because people are like, well, if she uses that shampoo, then it must be really good shampoo. Like, just because that person says it's good enough for me. But I also like to talk about how you can become the authority. There's a million ways you can become an authority. Maybe it's your local cable station just coming up with a little show about real estate. Definitely blogging and writing and stuff like that. Writing a book is easier than ever. Anybody can write a book, or blog or be the authority. Even if you use a simple program like LinkedIn blogging, you can, because you're writing the article, you become the expert on what you are writing about. Number 5, if you want to influence people to make a buying decision, one way you can persuade people is by doing number 5, which is scarcity. Everybody wants more of what is not available. The one big one that we can all relate to during the pandemic is toilet paper. When there's a lack of toilet paper, everybody wants toilet paper. So that's insane if you think about this. Like, this is craziness, but it's good information that we can use for our businesses. So one story by the way, Apple's great at this as well. Apple, by the way, when they release a new Apple Watch or a new phone, they specifically make it so that there's not enough of them. So it's Apple. They know how many people are going to buy them, and they could easily, for the release date, know how many people are going to want the new Apple phone and have that many ready. But they specifically release a limited number. Why? Because look at this. Like, you see a picture like this and you'll see people camped out for 48 hours because they want to be the first one to get the phone. And by the way, think about it. If you look at the people in this line for a phone, how many people would not make the buying decision right now? They just don't need to. Like, they don't have to have a phone right now. But the fact that there's a limited supply and they might not get one for a while persuades them, it pushes them to make a buying decision. One of the best people that I like to talk about here is my good friend, Michael Carucci from Gibson Sotheby's Real Estate in Boston. I've been on listing appointments with him. He is a high-end residential broker. His average price is probably around $3 or $4 million in per sale. So he does he markets to the luxury clientele, and I've been on his listing appointments and I've watched what he does. And the way he shows up at a listing appointment is he makes it clear from the very beginning that he may not want to work with you. So he basically lets the client know that I do a lot of business. I have limited time in my day. I can't, for every one listing appointment I go on, or for every 5 listing appointments I go on, I'll choose one that is the one that I feel like I have time to work with. And this is what I'll tell you. He creates, he pushes that, I won't say push, he definitely persuades the person to make a buying decision. They want him more because he just said they might not want him, that he might not want them. So that's just one example of how you can use it in your business. So think about that people who feel something is in limited supply want it even more. The scarcity of an item does more than raise the possibility of loss. It also raises the judged value of the item. So let that sink in for a little bit, write that down. The scarcity of an item does more than raise the possibility of loss. It also raises the judged value of that item. Any constraint on access increases the worth of what is being offered. So let's go back for a second to my friend Michael. He goes into a high-end listing appointment. He makes it clear he might not have the time to or inclination to help somebody list their $4 million house because he's in high demand and can only handle a certain number of listings. Now you've got the person that wants him even more because he just said that he might not have time. So he's speaking to something within us that's ingrained in us and humans. But think about what I said here, that any constraint on access increases the worth of what is being offered. Because what I will say is what you typically would not see in one of Michael's listing appointments is you're not going to see a client trying to haggle on a commission rate at the end of that presentation, because he has just created a perception of such high value that the client now doesn't want to risk potentially not being chosen as one of Michael's listings by now haggling on a commission rate. So just super interesting little nuances, but this all comes down, we're in the business of helping people make decisions. Number 6, consistency influences us to make decisions. Normally we want to be and we want to be seen. We want to be and be seen as consistent with our existing commitments, such as our previous statements we've made, stands we've taken, and actions we have performed. So you want to, if you can get somebody to make a statement about something, they are more likely to perform after that statement is made in ways that are consistent with that previous statement. By the way, this is really important, and I talk about this in when it comes to a class I do on getting buyer agency contracts signed. For Massachusetts, we do not require our agents to have a buyer agency contract signed. I encourage agents to do it because it's a smart business practice. But also what I will say is that you increase your likelihood that that buyer is going to buy from you if they sign that contract, because now they want to be consistent with what they already said they were going to do. So if somebody signs a contract that says, I am going to work with you, you significantly increase the likelihood that that person's going to buy a home now, because they want to be consistent with what they said they were going to do. So how I equate this in our business is, even if your buyer contract has an out, so you might have an out on that contract that says, if for any reason you don't like me, you can get out at any time. That's fine, because you might not be looking, when we talk in the words of persuasion, you might not be looking to contractually bind somebody to a buyer agency contract, but rather under the laws of influence and persuasion, you may instead be just looking to find people who act and make decisions based on the fact that they want to be consistent with what they said they were going to do. And there's power in that. So those were the first 6 rules of persuasion, how to get people to do what you want to do, what you want them to do. The premise of the lessons today all come from a book called The Psychology of Persuasion. So it's called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. And it is an important book for anybody in sales or marketing or in business, because all of us are in the business of getting people to make decisions. So this is just the first half of the program. I wanted to talk about like the act of getting people to make a decision your way. The next piece is Robert Cialdini, who wrote Influence. later came out several years later with a new and updated book. It's a little bit different. It's got a slight twist to what we just learned. And what the twist is he said that you can further increase your ability to get somebody to make a decision through what is called persuasion. So let's talk about persuasion. Persuasion is the process for arranging for recipients to be receptive to a message before they encounter it. So what we spent the first half of the program talking about was getting people to make the decision. But what if there were steps we could do before we get there, before we get to the point that we want them to make a decision? What are the steps we could do beforehand to get them to be more receptive to the decision that we want them to make? So like if I want somebody to list their home with me, what steps could I take in advance? What steps could I take in advance to make it more likely that they could hear what I'm even saying to them? To persuade optimally, it is necessary to persuade optimally. That's basically the second half that we're moving into. What we present first changes the way people experience what we present next. So think about that. By the way, in sales, and think about yourself being sold. I'm sure all of us have been in situations where somebody's trying to sell us something and we can't even hear it. Like we're just not psychologically in a place, like we cannot even hear what their message is because we're somewhere else. And that happens when we go on a listing appointment. I mean, we sometimes do a listing appointment or a buyer appointment, and that person is not psychologically in a place that they can be persuaded to do anything. So there are things we can do to get them ready to make a buying decision. And what those steps or things we can do is we can persuade them. We're going to get them ready. We're going to do something first before we start moving them towards making that decision. So what I want you to think about is that the steps leading up to somebody making a buying decision, and for us in real estate, that buying decision is like putting an offer on a property or listing their house with us. But this is anything in life, by the way, like getting your kid to eat vegetables or read a book. There's a psychology around helping people make a decision the way you want them to make a decision. And I compare it to like a game of chutes and ladders where there's certain things we can do beforehand, before we get to that decision-making process. There's certain things we can do that move us closer to the decision that we want them to make. And also there's things we can do that potentially move them further away from the decision that we want them to make. So persuasion is kind of like a game of chutes and ladders that we have to like walk carefully. We have to pay attention to the steps we're taking beforehand, because little teeny nuances are going to affect our ability to be heard by the person we're asking to make a decision. So the first idea behind persuasion is what is called trust. People are more likely to hear us and hear what we are asking them to decide. They are more likely to decide the way in which we want them to decide, such as list their home with us or buy a home through us. They are more likely to hear us if they trust us. So this is super interesting because sometimes we do not have built into our presentations for our buyers and sellers. We don't have anything built in. We're not taking any steps to prove to the person that they can trust us. And by the way, these can be super subtle nuances. In the book, they talk about a fire alarm salesman. So this was a guy that was in the business of going like to houses and convincing them to buy fire alarms. And the company, the fire alarm company, said there's this one guy that outperforms everybody else. Like, what does he do differently than all of our other salespeople? Because the average salesperson has a close rate of this percent, but this one salesperson has this close rate up to here. So they sent out team members to follow their number one salesperson around. They're like, we need to figure out what he does that's different than everybody else. And what they learned, so they go on the first appointment to watch this fire alarm salesman. So the fire alarm salesman goes into the appointment. It's at a person's house. So it's at a stranger's house. They go in, he goes in, and he's sitting in their living room showing his presentation about the importance of fire alarms. And then that salesman says, I actually forgot something in the car. I want to go out and grab my book or my briefcase or my pen. I need to run outside. You read these papers and I'll be right back in 2 minutes. Is it okay if I just let myself in? And they said, sure. So the people go through, they're reading all the stuff. The salesman goes out to the car. He comes back in and makes the sale. So, all right. So far, the guy following him from the sales company, the fire sales company, says, I don't know, that doesn't look like he did anything that much different than anybody else would do. So they go to the next house, and the number one salesperson goes in. He's got somebody following him because they're trying to figure out, like, what is it that this guy does different than the other salesman. So they're in the second house, totally different customer. The fire alarm salesman sitting at the now the kitchen table, and he goes through his presentation, etc. And then he says to the customer, I actually forgot something in my car. I am going to run out to my car. I'll be right back. You guys read through this. Is it okay if I just let myself back in? And the people, of course, said, yeah, no problem. Let yourself back in. Again, he comes back and he makes the sale. Turns out the nuance, the secret to the number one fire alarm salesperson's success, this little tiny nuance, is that when you let somebody let themselves into your house, psychologically, you trust them. So psychologically, if you, as a stranger, let somebody exit your house and then also let themselves back in without having to ring the doorbell, psychologically, you have bonded yourself to that person because you have created a level of trust. So in that situation, the little nuance that number one salesperson was doing is he was creating a psychological trust, that the people now trusted him. And when people trust you, you can move them closer to a buying decision. The next is privileged moments. This still goes to persuasion. So this is the steps leading up to persuading someone or influencing them to make the decision you want them to make. And it's called privileged moments. And basically what this says is that the law of reciprocity does not last forever. This is really important. A privileged moment means you can create moments of opportunity whenever you want, but just know that those moments of opportunity do eventually expire. So that means that you have to keep doing it. So if you do a big favor for someone, now you're in a position to ask for a favor back. Think of it, I don't know what the favor could be, but let's just say that you have friends that are moving and they ask you to come help them pack boxes and move to their new house. And you go spend an entire Saturday helping them move. Well, now you have a privileged moment because under the law of reciprocity, we know that that person now wants to do something for you. But basically what privileged moments is saying is that the reciprocity doesn't last forever. So if you are thinking that you want that person to do something for you, then you need to ask for it quickly or you're going to lose the chance. So when I do my interviews, so I've done hundreds of interviews with CEOs, business leaders. Oftentimes I ask those CEOs for something. So the value I'm creating for them is that I'm sitting with them for 45 minutes, I'm learning about them, and now I'm writing an article that I'm going to feature around them so that they can share it with their employees, their customers. So I have a privileged moment when I do something like that, because now oftentimes they want to somehow return the favor because I've done a big favor for them. So in some of those instances, I've asked for a preferred partnership. We want to be the preferred real estate partner of your 500-person organization. The point is, I got to ask for that fairly soon after I've done the article, because now it's still fresh in their mind. If I ask for it a year later, the privileged moment is diminished. Also, think about this. When the way we ask questions to people, we potentially create privileged moments. So we send people down psychological chutes and ladders by asking people certain things. These chutes create privileged moments where we are more likely to get what we want. In the book, they talk about at a mall, there was this company, they're a survey company, where they were required to go to malls and get random strangers to fill out a survey about whatever. It could be about products, things like that. They're a survey company. So they have to interrupt people who are at the mall to shop to get them to fill out a survey. And they ran some tests using this idea of privileged moments. And so they started asking people to fill out, hey, would you mind filling out a quick survey? And they realized like very few people want to be stopped in the middle of their shopping to fill out a survey. And so they got a small success rate. 3% of people said, okay, fine, I'll fill out the survey. Then they decided to try something using the law of privileged moments. And so instead of just reaching out and asking somebody, hey, would you be willing to fill out a survey, which they knew was going to get them a super low number of people to fill out that survey, instead they asked a question. So now they said, all right, instead of doing it the old way, now stop people at the mall and ask them a question first. And the question is, do you consider yourself a helpful person? So think about that. Think about the old way. Say you're shopping at the mall. Think about the old way somebody asks, hey, will you fill out a survey? Me, I'd keep walking. I'm like focused on what I want to get done. Now picture yourself, somebody stops you and says, hey, do you consider yourself a helpful person? Well, doesn't everybody consider themselves a helpful person? There's other ways, other questions you can do this with. Do you consider yourself an adventurous person? Now, I have a privileged moment. If I say that I consider myself a helpful person, now me as a surveyor, I have a privileged moment where I can ask that person to be helpful to me and ask them to fill out the survey. And by the way, it went from like 5% of people filling out the survey to 75% of people, because it goes back to what we said about persuasion in general. People are consistent with something they've already said. So now if I've already told you I'm a helpful person, I am more like, you've just put me in a position that I have to be helpful because of that idea of consistency, that law that we spoke about a little while ago. The cult recruiters, by the way, use this. There was, I forget the name of the cult. They wear orange robes, and they used to do this at airports, and they would walk up to somebody and give them a rose, because psychologically, if I receive a rose, I have a privileged moment in which now I feel like I have to do something for that person. Now, if somebody gave me a rose, like one of these cult recruiters gave me a rose, the privilege moment's gone, even like 20 minutes later. But they might be able to get me to stop and have a conversation because I received a gift under these privileged moments. So think about how you can get somebody ready to make a buying decision, how you can get somebody ready to be persuaded by using this idea of privileged moments. The next thing we're going to talk about is focused attention. When attention is paid to something, the price is that attention is lost to something else. The human mind appears able to hold only one thing in conscious awareness at a time, and the toll is momentary loss of focused attention to everything else. So there's interesting statistics about this. The amount of news coverage can make a big difference in the perceived significance of an issue among observers as they are exposed to the coverage of it. Great communicators can use attention drawing techniques to amplify the judged importance of a feature. I'm not going to get into the politics of this, but we see this right now with all the stuff that's going on in the media. When the media gets us to focus on one thing, it is to the detriment of everything else that is going on in the world. We're so focused on the one thing they're telling us matters that we stop focusing on all of the other stuff. There's some cool stories within the book, and I'm going to share the book with you at the end. March 2003, President George Bush ordered the invasion of Iraq by US-led forces to rid Saddam Hussein's regime of weapons of mass destruction. After a long and brutal slog that cost the US in blood, money, prestige, and global influence, the weapons of mass destruction were never found. To save face, the US government kept changing their purpose for starting the war, eliminating Saddam's humanitarian abuses, terminating Iraq's support of al-Qaeda, safeguarding the world's oil supply, and establishing democracy in the Middle East. The US deflected their changing reasons for the war through a cool media program, and that was the embedded reporter program. So tons of reporters and media personnel were allowed to be part of the war, like they were embedded right alongside the troops. The result is that almost all of the reports coming out of the Iraq war were human interest stories of soldiers and Iraqi people from these live-in reporters. Because the reporters were living and working with the soldiers, the stories were slanted in favor of the military, distracting the country from the real issue as to why the war was even started to begin with. So this is probably like a long and complicated example, but the way that we can use it in our listing and buyer presentations is when you're in front of a buyer or seller, like what matters in your presentation is whatever you make matter. So think about that. It's so interesting to me because what actually matters. So interestingly, like I like to compare this to market share, because there are some towns where we by far own the market. We have #1 market share in many, many towns. There are also towns that we have very little market share. And it's always interesting to me when an agent says that they lost a listing because they didn't have market share. Because what we know as real estate agents is market share does not help nor impede our ability to sell real estate whatsoever. It has zero influence on our ability to get a property sold. And I say that knowing that in some towns, we absolutely have market share. And in a town where I have #1 market share, absolutely 100%. In my listing presentation, I'm going to tell you that market share matters. We're the number one real estate company in this market. But knowing full well in the back of my head that that does not necessarily make a difference in our ability to help the client. The point of this, however, is that anything that you put as being important in that presentation will be seen as important in the eyes of the person. And Julie just said, does market share even matter to the average person? 100% not, but you will lose. So I'm saying market share absolutely does not matter to the customer. And your average customer isn't even going to know like what market share means or anything, except you can lose on market share if you have a competitor that goes in and gets somebody's focused attention on something. That is why part of our job in influencing somebody to make a decision is to get their focused on attention on something else. So if I go into a listing presentation and I have the number one market share, by all means, I'm going to talk about market share. It's the most important thing. It's going to help us get your property sold, having market share. Because by the way, when another agent does that to you in a town where we don't have market share, you're going to have a hard time overcoming it unless you show up with a presentation that puts the focused attention on something else. So how this applies, as I said this to an agent recently, is I said, look, to get somebody's focused attention on something that nobody else in your marketplace can focus on. So for example, maybe it's the fact that you live in that town and grew up in that town. If I lived and grew up in that town and I didn't have market share, then I would have my listing presentation very highly focused on what matters most to this seller is that I live and work in this town. So you have to put your focus, you have to focus your listing presentation on the stuff that favors you. The other one I said to an agent I was sitting with recently, I said, we are the 9th largest real estate brand in New England. We helped 3,000 families last year buy and sell real estate. And I would put that in my presentation because not every other agent can do that. So I would talk about like the fact that we have 550 agents, that we're the 9th highest producing real estate brand in New England. I would put focused attention on that. So all I want you to think about is creating focused attention, because when you get people's attention focused on one thing, they don't have the ability to focus on something else. So highlight your unique value proposition. It matters if you say it matters. So think about that when you're putting together talking about the focused attention. I see Julie. Yeah, the market share matters only if you have market share. I mean, that's why I wrote the book, The 7 Secrets to Hiring a Lion, because I like consumers to know what really does matter. Market share is definitely not one. Being the number one agent in a particular marketplace does not mean that you're the best agent for that particular property. There's a lot of things that are built into the listing and buyer presentations of real estate agents across the country. There's a lot of things that are built into those presentations that don't really matter. However, they matter if we say they matter. So you have to think about your unique value proposition. What are the things that you can make sure the consumer thinks matters? Because when you do that, their focused attention is not on anything else. We can get people to focus. So as we're getting people ready to make a buying decision, such as buying through us or selling a house, threats to safety motivate people. It's ingrained in us as human beings. So communications that present the most frightening consequences work better than messages that present positive messages. Again, I'm going to compare it to everything going on in the outside world. Like fear motivates people way more than like positivity. So one of the ways you can do that, by the way, is in your listing and buyer presentation. So many agents forget to put this in, like list the things that can go wrong if you choose the wrong agent. So if you don't list that, people are like, huh, doesn't really matter which agent I choose. It's probably all going to be the same. But think about using all the other tools we talked about today, listing out like these are the things that can go wrong, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you choose the wrong agent, or these are the things that can go wrong if you choose not to work with a broker at all and try to sell it on your own. The things that could go wrong for that seller is the property could sit on the market, the holding costs of the property over time. You don't want to be stuck holding this property for 6 months, do you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller? That's at $3,000 a month just for the mortgage. We're not even including utilities, the cost of upkeep, landscaping. The other piece, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is that if you choose the wrong agent to negotiate on your behalf, if they have the other side on this transaction is going to have their own representation. And you would not want to have like a killer negotiator on the other side of the transaction, and then you have a weak negotiator on your side. So one of the things that I pride myself in is that I'm a very strong negotiator, and I have to be, because on the other side of the transaction, there could be a great negotiator. I use this. You could end up with a real estate firm with an ulterior motive. I use that as an example because for many years, we competed with isoldmyhouse.com. Really what they wanted was mortgage leads. That was the purpose of their business, their ulterior motive. But there's definitely companies now, act like big companies today, that don't really care about necessarily a smooth real estate transaction. They want mortgage leads and title leads and all the other business that comes from it. So just think about how you can use fear, knowing that, like, yeah, we want to be positive people, but that's not going to motivate people. That doesn't get people ready to make, it doesn't put them in a decision-making place. Fear does. The other thing that motivates people, or like kind of gets them ready to make a decision, is when we can create a mystery of some sort. People love solving mysteries. A simple way to capture and hold somebody's attention is creating a mystery. So how could you use this in a listing presentation? One of the ways is sometimes as real estate agents, we show up and we say, the value of your house is this, based on all the information I've put out here. The value of your property is $400,000. What if we didn't do it that way? What if we instead showed up with all the comps and then all the nice and pretty pictures of all the other listings that we're comparing against? And then together we solve the mystery with our seller. And we say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, let's look at this house first. Look at all the new finishes and the landscaping and the new paint job and the brand new kitchen in this house as compared to you. Do you think this comp is nicer than your property or not as nice? And then they say, well, that one is kind of nicer. Okay, we put that in a pile over here. So now we have a pile. In other words, we're getting the person consumed into the mystery with us. So we're keeping the end of that is that you have a consumer that has buy-in to what you just said because they helped you determine the value of it. Number 6, getting somebody ready to be in a position, getting somebody to be in a position, and I love what Louisa said here, because this kind of goes into the counter arguments piece of it. One of the ways to get people ready to be in a position to make a decision with you is you can enhance somebody's acceptance of your message by reducing the availability of strong counter arguments. So think about this, and I always say, like, if there's elephant in the room when you're on a listing presentation, I think it's a bad idea to ignore the elephant, because the best way to control what happens with that elephant is addressing it. And that's why what Louisa says here, Louisa says, I say, why would you want to list with someone that has all the listings in town? They can't give you the quality amount of time that I can give you daily. So think about that, because how many times have you gone on a listing appointment and you're up against the person that has every listing in the town and you just don't address it? You're like, well, maybe they won't even notice. But what if instead, like, you address it right off the bat? Now you've eliminated the counter argument for that person. Counter arguments change the focus and attention of what's important. So all that means is that if you don't address the elephant in the room and the other side brings it up, it's a way bigger deal when they bring it up and now you have to counter explain it. Way bigger deal than if you had just brought it up and kind of pushed it off, like bring it up politely, say, this is one of the reasons why, like, by the way, Mr. and Ms. Seller, I just want to address, I know you're meeting with so-and-so and they have 10 listings in the town right now, but I just want you to think about, like, why would you want to work with somebody that is currently working with 10 of your competitors in town, like 10 other properties that they're going to try to sell against yours? Why would you want to do that? And then move on to the next thing. Now it's not like this huge thing that the customer brings up. You've put them in a position to make a buying decision. Skilled attorneys and salespeople include counter arguments in their presentations so that no counter argument can be made by the customer or the person that you're trying to influence. Know the value proposition of your competition so that you can propose strong counter arguments. I am a big advocate of always knowing who you're up against on a listing appointment, number one. And number two, you should know exactly how to sell against that other party, and you should bring it up right in the presentation. So like one little thing that, I mean, at our company, the listing agent gets all the calls that come in on their property, but at other companies, that's not the case. It could be a call center and then it gets referred to another real estate agent, or it could be an uptime agent. So like, if you know going in that you're up against one of those brokerages that has uptime agents, why wouldn't you like bring up that argument without the other side having to even say anything? So without the customer having to bring it up, because again, it's a much bigger deal if you do not address the elephant in the room. Next way to get people ready to hear your message is associations. This goes into persuasion as well. We talked about this a little while ago. Right now, we're talking about persuasion, getting people ready to make a decision. People associate, like, we can't help it. We are human beings and we easily associate stuff. So photos of people winning increase both the achievement related thoughts and productivity to individuals exposed to it. So when you're like, that's why I put this picture here of one of Tammy Byers, I think, Byers. Like, those matter. When you post stuff to your social media, post pictures of people winning. And for us, people winning is finding their dream home or selling their home. Because the more photos that you embed of good stuff, then they're going to associate you with good stuff. Other associations. This is so interesting to me. I was in the mortgage industry for many years before I got into real estate. And in the mortgage industry, I used to go to people's houses all the time and take mortgage applications. And people used to always ask me if I wanted a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. And I was always like, no, 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 I'm all set. Thanks anyways. I can't have a cup of coffee, or I don't want a cup of coffee. What I learned through the power of persuasion is that if you want to get somebody into a position that they're ready to hear your message, of course you should take a cup of coffee. Just like the fire salesman that built trust by leaving and coming. If you are sitting in somebody's house having a cup of coffee with them, you are no longer just a real estate agent to them. Like, you're a friend. You, without even realizing it, take your relationship to a new level by just accepting a cup of coffee or having a tea at their kitchen table with them. Also, our names matter. We as humans love to see our own names. So think about that in your listing presentation. So simple, but if you took 10 minutes, like embedding into your listing presentation before you show up, a picture of the family or something with their name on it. Like this whole Coke thing, I forget the actual number, but Coke had one of its lowest sales years in many years. And they came out with this promotion of putting people's names on the Coke can, and they had a massive increase. It was the first time in decades they had had such an increase in sales. And it was by putting people's names on a can, because people like to see their names. So even if I don't feel like Coke, if I see my name on Coke, or even more so, I'm going to go look for my name on a thing of Coke. So people love to see their names. So customize those presentations. People love stuff that has a rhyme or a rhythm embedded into your presentations. I love, like, Michael Durkin in Northborough always says Durkin sells, things like that. If you can get people to remember like a poem or a saying, it'll stick with them. And then 8 is togetherness. If you can create a sense of we-ness to get others invested in your business success, you will put them in a position to want to buy through you, to make a decision with you. You can do that by asking for advice, co-creating, like I said a little while ago, like coming up with the listing price together. And then 8, localism. Humans have a tendency to favor people who exist in close proximity to them or grew up in the same neighborhood or from the same town. It matters. Like, that's why I said earlier, do your research before you go on that listing appointment and figure out what you have in common. Number 8 is kinship. You build instant trust if people feel like they are part of your family. Warren Buffett does this in his annual report every year. He speaks to his people as if they are family. It creates instant trust and things like that. So that's basically it. I know we're past our time, way past our time. But final thoughts: who we are with respect to any choice is where we are attentionally in the moment before the choice. So where persuasion is about helping people make a choice, persuasion is about helping people make a choice. Persuasion is about getting people attentionally to the right place so that they are in a position to make a decision with us. We can be channeled to those privileged moments by cues we haphazardly bump into our daily settings, or by cues we use as skilled communicators that place people there. In either case, those moments are persuasive. So by using all the skills we talked about today, you can build your business on purpose. And the second half of today's program, whereas the first half of today's program was also a Robert Cialdini book called Influence, the second half of today's program was brought to you by a book called Persuasion, which is a revolutionary way to influence and persuade. With that, thank you. I apologize for going over in our program, but I hope everybody found it helpful to their business and life. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone, and have a great afternoon. Thanks.